My name is Cassandra. I'm 28 years old, and right now I'm sitting in a moving truck staring at my childhood home through the rearview mirror for what I know will be the last time. 3 days ago, I sat at that dining table where my parents looked me straight in the eyes and said the words that shattered everything I'd ever believed about family. My mother's voice still echoes in my head like a broken record. Your sister was born to live soft. She needs to be taken care of. And then my father, without even a hint of remorse, added the final blow. You're strong, you'll be fine. Don't like it. Leave. So here I am. Leaving. The irony isn't lost on me. They never thought I actually would. For 28 years, I bent myself into shapes I didn't recognize. Sacrificed pieces of my soul I'll never get back. All for the sake of a family that saw me as nothing more than a workhorse while my younger sister Peyton got to coast through life wrapped in cotton wool and privilege. But that dinner, that moment when they chose her comfort over my humanity one final time, something inside me didn't just break. It woke up. And what it woke up to was rage, clarity, and a plan. I never thought the family I'd built my entire life around would be the one to destroy me, but here's how it all went down. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever felt like the forgotten child in your family, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone in this. Make sure you subscribe because what happened next is going to blow your mind, trust me. The revenge I got wasn't loud or dramatic, it was calculated, cold, and absolutely devastating. So stick around. Because you won't want to miss a single detail of how I turned my family's biggest mistake into my greatest victory. Let me paint you a picture of what my life looked like before everything fell apart. My father, Bradford, worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm, the kind of man who believed in traditional values and rigid hierarchies. My mother, Diane, stayed home after Peyton was born, dedicating herself to what she called raising proper daughters, though that dedication seemed exclusively reserved for my younger sister. Peyton, 4 years my junior at 24, had been the golden child since the moment she took her first breath. I remember being 7 years old, excited about becoming a big sister, thinking I'd finally have an ally in that house. I was so naive. Our family lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs of Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone and appearances mattered more than authenticity. From the outside, we probably looked like the perfect American family. But inside those walls, there was a clear hierarchy that I didn't even realize was abnormal until I was much older. Peyton's bedroom was the largest of the 2 kids' rooms, painted in soft lavender with professional decorations that my mother spent weeks selecting. She had a walk-in closet that was constantly filled with new clothes, shoes that cost more than my monthly allowance, and every gadget a teenager could want. My room, on the other hand, was barely 10 by 10 feet, painted in a dull beige that hadn't been updated since we moved in. I had a twin bed with a frame ID found at a garage sale when I was 14, a small desk ID assembled myself from instructions, and decorations ID made by hand because asking for money to buy posters seemed frivolous when Peyton needed a new laptop. The differences started early, and they were relentless. When I was 10 years old, my mother sat me down and explained that as the older sister, I needed to help around the house. That seemed reasonable at first. I started doing dishes, folding laundry, vacuuming the living room every Saturday. But Peyton, even as she got older, was never given the same responsibilities. By the time I was 15 and she was 11, I was cooking dinner 3 nights a week while she watched television in her room. When I asked why she didn't have to help, my mother said, "Peyton is more delicate. She gets overwhelmed easily. You're strong, Cassandra. You can handle it." I swallowed that explanation like medicine, bitter, but necessary. I told myself that being strong was a compliment, that my parents trusted me because I was capable. I didn't realize then that I was being groomed to serve. High school was when the financial disparity became impossible to ignore. I wanted to join the volleyball team, but the fees for uniforms and travel were $200. My father sat me down and explained that money was tight, that I'd need to get a part-time job if I wanted to participate in extracurricular activities. So, at 16, I started working at a local diner, slinging hash browns and refilling coffee cups every weekend and 3 nights a week after school. The money I earned went toward my team fees, my own clothes, my school supplies. Meanwhile, Peyton joined the dance academy that cost 3 times as much, and my parents paid every penny without hesitation. She performed in recitals wearing custom costumes that cost hundreds of dollars each. And I sat in the audience in my diner uniform because I had to go straight to work after the show. When I graduated high school, I had saved $5,000 for college. It felt like a fortune, the result of 2 years of constant work and careful saving. But it covered barely 1 semester at the state university I'd gotten into. College was a nightmare of student loans, second jobs, and ramen noodles. I applied for every scholarship I could find, worked as a resident advisor to get free housing, and spent my summers doing 2 jobs simultaneously to minimize the debt I was drowning in. I graduated with $40,000 in loans and a degree in marketing that I'd earned through sheer determination and countless sleepless nights. Peyton's college experience 4 years later was completely different. She went to a private liberal arts school that cost $60,000 a year, and my parents paid for all of it. She joined a sorority, studied abroad in France, and graduated without a single dollar of debt. When I asked my father how they could afford that when they'd told me money was tight, he said, "We're in a better position now. Besides, Peyton needs more support than you did. You've always been independent." That word, independent, was starting to sound less like a compliment and more like a life sentence. But I kept trying. I kept believing that if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, proved my worth enough, my parents would finally see me the way they saw Peyton. I was still operating under the delusion that love in a family was something you earned through merit rather than something given freely. The morning I landed my first real job after college as a junior marketing associate at a decent firm in Cleveland, I called my parents so excited I could barely speak. My mother's response was lukewarm congratulations followed immediately by, "That's wonderful, honey. By the way, Peyton is having trouble deciding on her major. Could you talk to her about career paths?" Even my victories became about my sister. Even my moments of pride were redirected to serve someone else. And I let it happen because I didn't know how to do anything else. 2 years ago, I finally felt like my career was taking off. I'd worked my way up from junior associate to senior manager at the marketing firm, putting in 60-hour weeks and taking on projects that nobody else wanted. My boss, a sharp woman named Patricia, pulled me aside one afternoon and told me I was being considered for a promotion to director level. It was everything I'd worked toward, the validation I'd been chasing my entire life. That same week, Peyton graduated from college with her liberal arts degree and absolutely no idea what to do with it. She'd spent 4 years sampling different majors, changing her mind every semester, and ultimately graduating with a degree in communications that she had no passion for. She called me crying one evening, saying she couldn't find a job, that the market was too competitive, that she didn't have any real skills. Against every instinct that was starting to whisper warnings in my head, I helped her. I rewrote her resume to highlight the few internships she'd barely completed. I coached her through mock interviews. I taught her how to navigate LinkedIn and networking events. When a position opened up in a different department at my company, I went to bat for her. I personally delivered her resume to the hiring manager, vouched for her character, and basically guaranteed she'd be a good fit. She got the job, and for about 2 weeks, I felt good about it. I thought maybe this was how sisters were supposed to help each other. That maybe I was finally building the relationship I'd always wanted. But Peyton struggled from day one. She showed up late consistently, turned in work that was sloppy and incomplete, and spent more time on her phone than actually doing her job. Her manager started asking questions, and those questions made their way back to me because everyone knew I'd recommended her. I tried to help her quietly, spending my lunch breaks going over her projects, staying late to fix mistakes she'd made, coaching her on professional behavior. But instead of appreciating the help, Peyton started to resent me for it. She told our parents that I was being condescending. that I was making her feel stupid, that I wasn't supporting her the way a sister should. The phone call from my father came on a Tuesday evening while I was in the middle of preparing for a major client presentation. His voice was stern, disappointed. The tone had used my entire childhood when I'd somehow fallen short. "Your sister is really struggling, Cassandra. She says you've been critical and unhelpful. She's family. You need to take care of her better than this." I tried to explain the reality of the situation, that I was already going above and beyond, that Peyton needed to take some responsibility for her own performance. But my father cut me off. "Shay's your little sister. She looks up to you. If she fails, that's on you." The logic was backwards and insane, but I found myself apologizing anyway, promising to do better, to be more patient. The situation came to a head during one of the most important weeks of my career. I had a presentation scheduled with potential clients worth over $2 million to the company. I'd spent 3 months developing the pitch, coordinating with multiple teams, perfecting every detail. The morning of the presentation, Peyton showed up at my desk in tears. She'd completely botched a project that was due that afternoon, and her manager was furious. If she didn't fix it, she might get fired. And because I was her sister, because I'd gotten her the job, she expected me to drop everything and save her. I should have said no. I should have told her that this was her responsibility, that I had my own critical work to focus on. But the lifetime of conditioning kicked in. That voice in my head that said good sisters sacrifice, that family comes first, that my needs were somehow less important than everyone else's. So I spent 2 hours fixing her disaster of a project, which meant I missed a crucial prep meeting for my presentation. I had to wing parts of my pitch that should have been rehearsed. And while I didn't completely bomb it, I wasn't at my best. The clients chose to go with a competitor, and my boss Patricia pulled me aside with concern in her eyes. "That wasn't like you, Cassandra. Is everything okay?" I couldn't even explain without sounding like I was making excuses. Meanwhile, Peyton's project got submitted on time with my corrections, and her manager praised her for the turnaround. She didn't thank me. She didn't even acknowledge what I'd sacrificed. Instead, she complained to our parents that I'd made her feel incompetent by having to help her. When I finally lost my temper and confronted her about it, asking her to please take some ownership of her work and stop dragging me into her problems, she started crying. Within an hour, my mother was calling, her voice sharp with accusation. "How could you make your sister cry at work? People saw you upsetting her. You're supposed to protect her, not attack her." I tried to defend myself, to explain the full context, but my mother wasn't interested in hearing it. "Peyton told us everything. She said you've been sabotaging her because you're jealous that she got a job at your company. That's petty. Cassandra, I raised you better than that." The accusation was so absurd, so completely disconnected from reality, that I actually laughed. But my mother took that laugh as confirmation of my cruelty. My father got on the line and said, "You need to apologize to your sister and you need to figure out how to work together professionally. She's family. Act like it." I apologized. I stood in front of Peyton's desk the next day and apologized for hurting her feelings, for not being supportive enough, for failing as a sister. She accepted with tears in her eyes and a performance worthy of an Oscar, and half the office witnessed it. What they didn't see was the slight smirk on her face when she turned away, the satisfaction of someone who'd just won a game I didn't even know we were playing. That moment should have been my wake-up call. It should have been when I realized that Peyton wasn't struggling, she was strategic. But I was still too deep in the fog of family obligation to see clearly. I went back to my desk, swallowed my anger, and told myself that this was just temporary, that things would get better. They didn't. A year and a half before everything imploded, I met Derek at a friend's wedding. He was 32, an architect with his own small firm, and he had this calm confidence that I found incredibly attractive after years of dealing with chaos. We started dating slowly, carefully, both of us busy with demanding careers. But after about 6 months, it got serious. He was talking about future plans, about maybe moving in together, about building something real. I was happy in a way I hadn't been in years, like maybe there was space in my life for something that was just mine, something that had nothing to do with my family's endless demands. I should have known better than to introduce him to them. But there was still this small, hopeful part of me that wanted my parents' approval, that wanted to show them I was worthy of love and success. So when my father suggested a family barbecue one Sunday in early summer, I brought Derek along. He was charming and polite, asking my father about his work, complimenting my mother's potato salad, making all the right small talk. And Peyton, who'd just gone through a breakup with her boyfriend of 3 months and was milking the heartbreak for maximum sympathy, was suddenly very interested in my relationship. She monopolized Derek's attention from the moment we arrived. She asked him endless questions about architecture, touched his arm when she laughed at his jokes, leaned in close when he showed her pictures of buildings he'd designed on his phone. I watched it happen with growing discomfort, but I didn't want to cause a scene. When I pulled her aside and quietly asked her to tone it down, she looked at me with wide, innocent eyes and said, "What? I'm just being friendly. You don't want me to be rude to your boyfriend, do you?" It was said with such perfect sweetness that I felt guilty for even bringing it up. The next week, Derek mentioned that Peyton had messaged him on social media asking for career advice. She was thinking about maybe going back to school for design, Shed told him, and wanted to pick his brain about the industry. It seemed harmless enough, though something about it made me uneasy. But Derek assured me it was just professional, just a quick conversation, nothing to worry about. So I let it go, telling myself I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust both of them. 2 weeks later, Peyton asked Derek to meet her for coffee to continue their conversation about career paths. He mentioned it to me casually, asking if I wanted to join them. I had a deadline at work, so I said no. Go ahead, help her out if you can. That coffee meeting turned into 2 hours of conversation that Derek described as surprisingly deep. Peyton had apparently opened up about feeling lost in life, about struggling to find her purpose, about always being in my shadow. Derek, being a genuinely kind person, felt sympathetic. He didn't see what I was starting to see, that Peyton was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push before anyone pushed back. The text messages started after that. I'd see Derek's phone light up with notifications from Peyton at odd hours. When I asked about it, he showed me the messages openly. They were mostly her asking questions about design programs or sharing articles about architecture. Nothing overtly inappropriate, but constant. She was inserting herself into his life in small, incremental ways, and he didn't see it as a problem because she was my sister. He thought he was helping our family relationship by being supportive of her. A month into this pattern, I picked up Derek's phone to check the time while he was in the shower, and I saw a message preview that made my stomach drop. It was from Peyton. "I keep thinking about what you said last night. You really get me in a way nobody else does." I opened the thread without permission, something I'd never done before, and I saw weeks of conversations that had shifted from professional to personal. She was texting him late at night, sharing feelings and vulnerabilities, creating an emotional intimacy that had nothing to do with career advice. And Derek, for his part, was responding with empathy and attention, not seeing how he was being manipulated. When I confronted him about it that evening, he was defensive at first, saying I was overreacting, that Peyton was just going through a hard time and needed someone to talk to. But as we dug deeper into the messages, as I pointed out the patterns and the strategic timing, he started to see it too. The flirtation that was carefully disguised as neediness, the way she always reached out when she knew we'd be apart, the subtle implications that she understood him better than I did. He looked sick when he finally admitted, "She's been pursuing me. I didn't want to believe it because she's your sister. But you're right. This isn't appropriate." I should have felt vindicated, but instead I felt humiliated. Derek agreed to set firm boundaries with Peyton, to tell her that their communication needed to stop. But before he could do that, Peyton went nuclear. She showed up at my apartment crying, saying she needed to confess something. She told me, with tears streaming down her face, that she'd developed feelings for Derek, That she couldn't help it, that it just happened. She apologized profusely, saying she never meant for it to happen, that she felt terrible about it. It was a masterful performance, positioning herself as the victim of her own emotions rather than the architect of deliberate manipulation. I told her to leave and I called our parents to explain what had happened, expecting them to be shocked, to be disappointed in Peyton's behavior. Instead, my mother's response was, "Well, feelings happen, honey. Peyton is young and she's still figuring things out. You can't blame her for being attracted to someone. Derek clearly wasn't the right man for you if he could be swayed that easily." My father added, "You're being dramatic. Peyton made a mistake. She's apologized. You need to forgive her and move on. That's what families do." Not once did they acknowledge the betrayal. Not once did they hold Peyton accountable for deliberately targeting my relationship. Instead, they framed it as a youthful indiscretion that I needed to be mature enough to overlook. Derek and I tried to move past it, but the trust was broken. Not just between us, but in my ability to have anything in my life that my sister couldn't infiltrate and destroy. We broke up 3 weeks later, and Peyton posted a photo on Instagram 2 days after that. Her and Derek at a coffee shop, captioned, "Sometimes the best conversations happen with unexpected people." They weren't dating, he told me later when he reached out to apologize. Shed ambushed him and taken the photo without him realizing Shed posted it, but the damage was done. Everyone who knew us saw that photo and drew their own conclusions. I spent the next month in a fog of anger and grief. I'd lost my boyfriend, but more than that, I'd lost any remaining illusion that my sister loved me or that my parents would ever defend me. And the worst part was that everyone acted like I was the problem for being upset, like I was petty and jealous instead of justifiably furious. Peyton played the role of remorseful younger sister perfectly around others while doing nothing to actually make amends. And my parents praised her for handling things with grace. That was when I started to realize that nothing I did would ever change the dynamic. I was the strong one who could handle anything, and Peyton was the delicate one who needed to be protected from consequences. Those roles had been assigned long ago, and my family had no intention of rewriting the script. 1 year ago, just as I was starting to rebuild my life after the disaster with Derek, my father called with an edge of desperation in his voice that I'd never heard before. He told me that he and my mother were in serious financial trouble. They'd refinanced the house years ago to pay for Peyton's expensive college, and now with some unexpected medical bills and my father's reduced hours at work, they were struggling to make the mortgage payments. They were 3 months behind, and the bank was starting to send threatening letters about foreclosure. He asked if I could help them, just temporarily, just until they got back on their feet. I'd finally finished paying off my student loans 6 months earlier. It had taken me 6 years of living in a tiny apartment, driving a car that was older than some of my coworkers, and putting every spare dollar toward that debt. But I was finally free, and I'd managed to save $35,000. It was supposed to be my down payment on a house, my chance to finally have something permanent and mine. But when your father calls and says the family is about to lose their home, what are you supposed to say? I agreed to loan them $20,000. I made it clear that it was a loan, not a gift, and my father agreed readily. He said they'd pay me back within a year, that he was expecting a bonus at work, that this was just a temporary bridge. I transferred the money into their account the next day, watching my dreams of homeownership evaporate with one click. But I told myself it was worth it, that this was what family did for each other, that surely this act of generosity would finally show my parents that I was worthy of their appreciation. For 2 months, everything seemed fine. My parents were making their mortgage payments again, the crisis was averted, and they thanked me every time I called. I started looking at houses again, adjusting my budget to account for my smaller down payment, telling myself I could still make it work. The housing market in Cleveland was competitive, but I found a small 2-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood that I could afford with my reduced savings. I was about to put in an offer when I saw Peyton's Instagram story. She was on a beach in Hawaii, staying at a resort that cost at least $400 a night. The photos showed her lounging by an infinity pool, drinking cocktails that came with little umbrellas, posing in designer swimwear with tags still visible. Shed posted captions about treating herself and healing her heart after her recent breakup with some guy I'd never even heard about. The trip went on for 8 days, and each day brought more photos of luxury and indulgence. I felt sick looking at them. I called my mother and asked, as calmly as I could manage, how Peyton could afford a trip like that when she was barely making ends meet on her entry-level salary. There was a long pause before my mother answered, and I could hear the guilt in her voice even though she tried to hide it. She said that Peyton had been really depressed after her breakup, that Shed needed something to lift her spirits, that they'd given her some money to help her take a vacation. When I asked how much, my mother got defensive. She said it wasn't my business, that they were allowed to help their daughter when she was struggling. I pushed harder, and finally my father got on the phone. He admitted they'd given Peyton $5,000 for the trip, $5,000 of the $20,000 ID loaned them. Money that was supposed to go towards saving their house was instead funding my sister's luxury vacation. I exploded. I yelled about betrayal, about priorities, about the complete insanity of giving money to one daughter for a vacation while the other daughter had sacrificed her savings to keep them from foreclosure. My father's response was cold. "We'll pay you back eventually, Cassandra. Don't be so selfish. Peyton was really hurting. She needed this more than you needed to buy a house right now. You're young, you have time." The entitlement in his voice, the casual dismissal of my sacrifice, broke something in me. I told him I wanted my money back immediately. All of it. He said that wasn't possible, that they'd used it to catch up on bills, that I was being unreasonable. I pointed out that they'd just given $5,000 to Peyton, so clearly they had money to spare. My mother jumped in, saying I was causing unnecessary drama, that family helped family without keeping score, that my attitude was disappointing. I hung up on them, shaking with rage. Over the next few weeks, I watched the housing market slip further out of reach. The little house I'd wanted went to another buyer. Prices in the city increased by 15% in just 6 months, propelled by an influx of new development. The down payment ID worked so hard to save would have been enough if ID bought when ID planned, but now it wasn't even close. My dream of homeownership was delayed indefinitely, while Peyton posted throwback photos from Hawaii with captions about gratitude and self-care. When I tried to talk to Peyton directly about it, she was completely unapologetic. She said our parents had offered her the money as a gift, that she had no idea it was connected to my loan, that I couldn't expect her to turn down help when it was offered. But the way she smiled when she said it, like Shed won something, told me she knew exactly what Shed done. Shed taken what should have been mine, and she felt no remorse about it. My parents never brought up paying me back again. When I mentioned it, they changed the subject or made vague promises about someday. The money was gone, absorbed into their lives and Peyton's luxuries, and I was supposed to just accept it. I was supposed to be the bigger person, the understanding daughter, the one who didn't make waves. And for a while longer, I tried to be that person. But resentment was building in my chest like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe every time I thought about what I'd lost. Not just the money, but the proof that to my family, I would always matter less than Peyton's comfort. 6 months before the final dinner, I lost the one person outside my family who I thought truly understood me. Lauren had been my best friend since college, the kind of friend who knew all my secrets, who'd helped me through the Derek breakup, who'd listened to countless hours of me venting about my family dynamics. She was the person I called when I needed to feel sane, when I needed someone to remind me that I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt by the way my family treated me. Losing her felt like losing the last lifeline I had to any kind of normalcy. It started subtly. Lauren began taking longer to respond to my texts, canceling plans at the last minute, seeming distracted when we did manage to meet up. I chalked it up to her being busy with work, with her new relationship, with life. I didn't want to be that needy friend who demanded constant attention. But after a few weeks of this pattern, I started to worry that I'd done something to offend her. I ran through our recent conversations in my head, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. But I couldn't pinpoint anything. Then one Saturday afternoon, I was walking through the mall trying to distract myself from my troubles when I saw them, Lauren and Peyton, arms linked, laughing together as they walked out of an expensive boutique carrying multiple shopping bags. They looked like old friends, comfortable and familiar, and I stood frozen in the middle of the walkway while shoppers flowed around me like water around a stone. They didn't see me. I watched them walk into another store, Peyton holding up a dress for Lauren's approval, both of them giggling about something I couldn't hear. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Lauren had met Peyton exactly twice, both times briefly at family events where they'd barely exchanged more than pleasantries. There was no reason for them to be shopping together, no logical explanation for the easy intimacy I just witnessed. I left the mall and sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to decide what to do. Finally, I called Lauren. She picked up on the fourth ring, her voice bright and cheerful. I asked her directly, without preamble, why she was hanging out with my sister. The silence on the other end of the line lasted too long. When Lauren finally spoke, her voice had lost all its warmth. She said that Peyton had reached out to her a few weeks ago, saying she was worried about me, that she wanted to understand me better, so she could be a better sister. Lauren had agreed to meet her for coffee, just to talk, because she cared about me and wanted to help our relationship. But that one coffee had turned into regular meetings, and according to Lauren, those conversations had opened her eyes to things she'd never understood before. I asked what things, and Lauren's response made my blood run cold. She said that Peyton had shown her a different perspective on our family dynamic, that maybe I'd been too focused on myself to see how my actions affected others, that perhaps my resentment toward Peyton was unfair and rooted in my own insecurities. I started to argue, to defend myself, to explain all the ways Peyton had deliberately sabotaged me, but Lauren cut me off. She said that Peyton had shown her text messages, screenshots of conversations where I'd apparently said cruel things about my sister, where I'd called her names and wished bad things would happen to her. I was completely bewildered because I'd never sent messages like that. I asked Lauren to send me the screenshots, and when they came through, I understood immediately what had happened. They were real messages from me, but they'd been expertly edited. A text where I'd said I'm so frustrated with Peyton's behavior at work had been cropped to just say I'm so frustrated with Peyton. A message where I'd written, sometimes I wish my parents would hold her accountable for once had been altered to read sometimes I wish my parents would disown her. Context had been stripped away. Sentences had been combined from different conversations, and the result was a portrait of me as a jealous, cruel older sister who resented her younger sibling's existence. I tried to explain this to Lauren, but she'd already made up her mind. Peyton had gotten to her first, had spent weeks building a narrative, and now my frantic explanations sounded exactly like what a guilty person would say. Lauren told me that she needed some space to think about our friendship, that she was disappointed in me, that she never realized I could be so toxic. I begged her to look at the metadata on those screenshots, to verify their authenticity, to just give me a chance to prove they'd been manipulated, but she'd already hung up. I tried reaching out over the next few days through texts and emails, sending her the original, unedited conversations, trying to show her the truth. But Lauren had blocked me on everything. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that Peyton had told Lauren I was harassing her, that I was so jealous of their new friendship that I was making up conspiracy theories about doctored screenshots. Peyton had positioned herself as the victim once again, the poor younger sister just trying to understand her difficult older sibling, now being attacked for her efforts. The loss of Lauren hurt more than losing Derek had. Derek had been a romantic relationship, relatively new, something that maybe wasn't meant to last anyway. But Lauren had been my friend for 7 years. She knew me, or at least I'd thought she did. The fact that Peyton could swoop in and destroy that friendship in a matter of weeks showed me just how good my sister was at manipulation. She didn't just want the things I had, she wanted to isolate me, to take away my support systems, to ensure that I had nowhere to turn except back to the family that treated me like a workhorse. I found myself completely alone. I couldn't talk to my parents about it because they'd just defend Peyton and accuse me of being dramatic. I couldn't talk to coworkers because mixing personal and professional was already a disaster thanks to Peyton working at the same company. I had acquaintances, people I was friendly with, but no one close enough to unload this kind of family trauma on. For the first time in my life, I understood what true isolation felt like. Peyton hadn't just taken my friend, she'd taken my ability to trust anyone new, because if she could turn Lauren against me that easily, who else might she manipulate? The worst part was seeing them together on social media. Peyton started posting photos with Lauren, tagging her in inspirational quotes about finding real friends, about surrounding yourself with positive people. Lauren liked and commented on every post, and each notification felt like a knife twisting in an old wound. They went to brunches, to wine nights, to yoga classes together. Peyton had slipped into my life and taken one of the most important pieces of it, and she was flaunting it like a trophy. And I had no recourse, no way to fight back without looking exactly like the jealous, unstable sister Peyton had painted me as. I stopped checking social media after that. I threw myself into work with a kind of desperate energy, staying late every night, taking on extra projects, doing anything to keep my mind busy enough that I couldn't think about how thoroughly Peyton was dismantling my life. But work, as it turned out, was about to become another battlefield. And this time, Peyton wasn't just going to hurt me emotionally. She was going to threaten the one thing I had left that made me feel competent and valued, my career. 4 months before the dinner that would change everything, my boss Patricia called me into her office with news that should have been the highlight of my career. The company was creating a new director of client strategy position, and I was being considered as the top candidate. It would mean a 40% salary increase, my own team to manage, and real influence over the direction of major campaigns. Patricia told me that I'd need to prepare a comprehensive presentation for the board of directors, showcasing my strategic vision and past successes. The presentation was scheduled for 6 weeks out, giving me plenty of time to prepare something exceptional. I was cautiously excited. After years of being passed over, of watching less qualified people get promoted because they were better at office politics, I finally had a real shot at the recognition I deserved. I started working on the presentation immediately, spending evenings and weekends researching market trends, compiling case studies, building a strategic framework that I knew would impress the board. I saved everything on my laptop, backed up to the cloud, taking no chances with something this important. I made the mistake of mentioning it at a family dinner 3 weeks before the presentation date. My parents were asking about work, a rare moment of interest in my life, and I let my guard down. I told them about the director position, about how hard I'd been working on the presentation, about how this could be the breakthrough I'd been working toward for years. My mother smiled and said she was proud of me. My father nodded approvingly. And Peyton, sitting across from me with a glass of wine in her hand, said congratulations with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. 2 weeks before my presentation, I brought my laptop to work as usual and set it on my desk while I went to grab coffee from the break room. When I came back, Peyton was standing next to my desk, looking flustered. She said she'd accidentally bumped into my desk and knocked over her coffee, which had spilled across my workspace. I looked down and saw coffee spreading across the surface, and my laptop was sitting right in the middle of the puddle. I grabbed it immediately, but it was too late. The liquid had seeped into the keyboard, and within minutes, the screen went black and refused to turn back on. Peyton was apologizing profusely, saying she was so sorry, she'd pay for the repairs, she felt terrible. But I was too panicked to care about her apologies. I rushed to IT to see if they could recover the hard drive, but the damage was extensive. They managed to retrieve most of my files, but my presentation, the one I'd spent weeks perfecting, was corrupted beyond recovery. Parts of it were salvageable, but huge sections were just gone, including my strategic framework and most of my case studies. I had backup files in the cloud, but they were from 2 weeks earlier, missing all the recent work I'd done. I spent the next 72 hours reconstructing what I'd lost, sleeping maybe 3 hours total, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. The presentation was no longer polished, no longer the masterpiece it'd been building. It was functional, adequate, but not exceptional. And then, 2 days before the big presentation, Peyton called in sick. Not just for 1 day, but for 3 days straight, right during a critical phase of a project her team was handling. Her manager called me in a panic, knowing I was Peyton's sister, asking if I could help cover some of her essential tasks because the client was demanding updates. I should have said no. I should have explained that I had my own critical presentation to focus on. But the conditioning was still there, that voice saying family comes first, that I had to help. So I spent hours handling Peyton's work, attending meetings she should have been in, putting out fires Shed left burning. By the time the presentation day arrived, I was exhausted, frazzled, and nowhere near as prepared as I needed to be. The presentation went fine, not terrible but not impressive. The board members asked questions I should have anticipated but hadn't had time to prepare for. I could see Patricia's disappointment even though she tried to hide it. The position went to an external candidate, someone brought in from a competitor company. Patricia told me that I was a close second, that I should try again when another opportunity came up, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. It'd been the favorite, and it fumbled it. And then, in what felt like a perfectly orchestrated finale, Peyton recovered from her mysterious illness the day after my failed presentation. She came back to work looking perfectly healthy, and within a week, she submitted a request to transfer to a different team. Not just any team, but specifically to the client strategy department, the one where the new director position was. When I confronted her in the office kitchen, keeping my voice low so no one would overhear, she acted confused. She said she'd been genuinely sick, that she had no idea her absence would affect me, that she was just trying to advance her own career by requesting the transfer. But there was something in her eyes, a gleam of satisfaction that told me everything I needed to know. She'd sabotaged my laptop, timed her sick days perfectly, and positioned herself to benefit from my failure, all while maintaining plausible deniability. I lost my temper. I didn't yell, but my voice was sharp and angry, as I told her exactly what I thought of her manipulations, her constant interference in my life, her complete lack of conscience. Other people were in the kitchen, and they heard enough to know something was wrong. Peyton's eyes filled with tears immediately. That practiced move she'd perfected over years of getting away with everything. She said I was being cruel, that she didn't understand why I hated her so much, that she'd only ever tried to be a good sister. Within an hour, I was called into a meeting with HR. Peyton had filed a complaint about me creating a hostile work environment, about me verbally attacking her in public, about a pattern of bullying that she claimed had been going on since she joined the company. She'd documented instances, all taken out of context, all framed to make me look like an aggressive bully and her like an innocent victim. I tried to defend myself, to explain the full situation. But HR's job isn't to determine truth, it's to protect the company from liability. They couldn't take sides in a family dispute, they said. But they had to take the complaint seriously. I received a written warning for unprofessional conduct. It went into my permanent employee file, a black mark that would affect my career trajectory at the company. Meanwhile, Peyton's transfer was approved, and she began working in the department where ID wanted to be director. She didn't get the director position, obviously, but she was now positioned to work directly with the person who did, learning from them, building relationships, setting herself up for future advancement. And I was stuck with a warning in my file and the knowledge that my own sister had deliberately sabotaged the most important opportunity of my career. That night, sitting alone in my apartment with a glass of wine I didn't want, and a future that looked increasingly bleak, I finally started to accept the truth I'd been avoiding for 28 years. Peyton didn't love me. Maybe she never had. I wasn't her sister in any meaningful sense. I was a resource to be exploited, an obstacle to be removed, a competitor to be defeated. And my parents had enabled every bit of it, teaching her from childhood that she could take whatever she wanted from me without consequences. I was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of hoping things would change. Tired of being the strong one who could handle anything. Something was going to break soon, and I was starting to hope it would be me, because at least then I'd have permission to stop trying. 3 days before I packed that moving truck, my mother called with a tone in her voice that I'd learned to recognize as the precursor to a demand disguised as a request. She said that the family needed to have dinner together, all four of us, that there was something important to discuss. She wouldn't tell me what it was over the phone, just insisted that it was crucial I be there Sunday evening at 6. I almost said no. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to decline, to protect myself from whatever fresh hell my family had planned. But some deeply ingrained sense of obligation pushed me to agree, and I hated myself for it even as the words left my mouth. I drove to my parents' house that Sunday with a knot of dread in my stomach that I couldn't explain. The sun was setting as I pulled into the driveway, casting long shadows across the lawn. I'd mowed countless times as a teenager while Peyton watched television inside. I sat in my car for a few extra minutes, gathering courage, before finally forcing myself to walk to the front door. My mother answered before I could knock, her smile too bright, too forced, and I knew immediately that whatever was coming was going to be bad. The dining room table was set formally, which was unusual for a family dinner. My mother had used the good china, the set that only came out for holidays and special occasions. Peyton was already seated, looking radiant in a new dress I didn't recognize, and next to her was a man I'd never met before. He was older, maybe mid-30s, wearing an expensive suit, and the kind of confident smile that came from never having to worry about money. My father sat at the head of the table, and the only empty chair was directly across from Peyton, positioned so I'd have to look at her throughout the entire meal. My mother introduced the stranger as Garrett, and the way she said his name carried weight, significance. Garrett stood to shake my hand, his grip firm and his eyes assessing me in that way successful people have of immediately calculating someone's worth. He was handsome in a conventional way, with perfect teeth and styled hair and a watch that probably cost more than my car. Peyton was glowing next to him, her hand resting on his arm with possessive comfort, and I understood before anyone said anything that this was her new boyfriend and that this dinner was some kind of announcement. We sat down to eat, and the conversation was aggressively normal at first. My mother asked about my work, and I gave vague, pleasant answers, not mentioning the warning in my file or the promotion ID lost. My father talked about golf, about home repairs, about nothing that mattered. Garrett talked about his company, a tech startup that had recently gone through a successful funding round, dropping numbers casually that made it clear he was wealthy. And Peyton just smiled, saying little, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Halfway through the main course, my father cleared his throat in that way that meant he was about to say something he considered important. He said that he and my mother had been doing a lot of thinking lately about the future, about their estate, about making sure both their daughters were taken care of. I felt my stomach drop because I knew where this was going. He continued, explaining that they'd been reviewing their will, making updates to reflect current circumstances, and they wanted to be transparent with us about their decisions. The house, he said, would go to Peyton. The majority of their savings, their retirement accounts, everything substantial they owned would be left to her. I would receive some personal items, some family photos, maybe a small cash amount, but the bulk of the estate would go to my sister. My mother jumped in before I could react, her voice defensive, explaining that they'd made this decision because Peyton needed the security more than I did. I was strong. I was independent. I had a good career. Peyton was more delicate, more vulnerable, and she needed the safety net that the inheritance would provide. I sat there in stunned silence as they laid out their reasoning, each justification more insulting than the last. They talked about me like I was a machine that didn't need maintenance, like my strength was infinite and my needs were non-existent. They talked about Peyton like she was made of glass, precious and fragile, deserving of protection at any cost. And through it all, Peyton sat with her hand in Garrett's, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, saying nothing but radiating satisfaction. When I could finally speak, my voice came out strained and tight. I asked about the $20,000 ID loaned them, the money that was supposed to be paid back. My father waved his hand dismissively and said I should consider that a gift to the family, that they'd used it to take care of essential expenses and that I shouldn't be keeping score about money within a family. I pointed out that they'd given $5,000 of it to Peyton for a vacation while I'd sacrificed my house fund to help them. My mother's face hardened, and she said I was being petty, that I needed to let go of grudges. I started listing everything else, my voice getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. I talked about growing up as the built-in maid, while Peyton relaxed. I talked about working multiple jobs while she had everything paid for. I talked about the sabotage at work, the boyfriend Shed tried to steal, the friend Shed turned against me, the pattern of destruction that had defined our entire relationship. My parents listened with expressions that ranged from uncomfortable to annoyed, and when I finished, there was a long silence. Then Peyton spoke for the first time since it arrived, her voice soft and trembling with manufactured emotion. She said I'd always been jealous of her, that I'd always resented her for being loved, that my bitterness was toxic and exhausting. She said Shed tried so hard to have a relationship with me, but I made it impossible. She said that maybe it was best if we took some space from each other, that my negativity was affecting her mental health. And then she held up her left hand, showing off a ring I hadn't noticed before, an engagement ring with a diamond so large it was almost vulgar. She and Garrett were engaged, she announced, and they were planning a wedding for next spring. My mother clapped her hands together in delight, as if this announcement somehow negated everything I'd just said. She started talking about wedding plans, about venues and dresses and guest lists. My father pulled out a bottle of champagne he'd apparently been saving for this moment. Garrett was congratulated and welcomed into the family with warmth I'd never received. And then my mother dropped the next bomb. They'd agreed to contribute $50,000 toward the wedding, to make sure Peyton had the perfect day she deserved. $50,000 for a wedding, when they'd cried poverty to get me to loan them $20,000 for their mortgage. $50,000 for one day of celebration, when they'd made me work multiple jobs to afford my own education. The hypocrisy was so enormous, so blatant, that I actually laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound that made everyone stop and look at me like I'd lost my mind. I asked them directly how they could justify this. How they could look me in the eye and pretend this was normal or fair or acceptable. My mother's face flushed, and she said that Peyton's happiness was important, that a wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event, that I was being selfish for trying to ruin her special moment. I said I wasn't trying to ruin anything. I just wanted acknowledgement. That the way they'd treated me my entire life was wrong. I wanted someone in that room to admit that they'd played favorites. That they'd used me. That they'd failed me as parents and as a sister. My father stood up from the table, his face dark with anger. He said that I needed to check my attitude. That I'd been given everything I needed growing up. That my constant complaining and victim mentality was unbecoming. He said I should be grateful for the opportunities it had, grateful for the family that had raised me, grateful that they were even including me in this conversation about the will. And then he said it. The words that would echo in my head for days afterward. Your sister was born to live soft. She needs to be taken care of. You're different. You've always been fine on your own. I waited for him to hear how that sounded, to recognize the inequality in his own words. But he just stood there, defiant, convinced of his own righteousness. My mother nodded in agreement. Peyton watched me with those calculating eyes, waiting to see what I'd do. And Garrett looked uncomfortable for the first time, like he was starting to realize he was marrying into a deeply dysfunctional family. I asked one more time, my voice barely above a whisper, if this was really how they saw things, if they truly believed it was acceptable to treat their children so differently. My father's response was cold and final. Don't like it? Leave. Those 4 words hung in the air like a challenge, like a dare. Like he was absolutely certain I wouldn't actually do it, because I never had before. It always stayed, always tried harder, always swallowed my pain and kept playing the role they'd assigned me. But something in me shifted in that moment. I looked at my father, at his self-righteous anger. I looked at my mother, at her willful blindness. I looked at Peyton, at her barely concealed triumph. And I looked at Garrett, a stranger who'd stumbled into this nightmare and had no idea what he was getting into. And I realized that I didn't want to be in this room anymore. I didn't want to be in this family anymore. I didn't want to spend one more second of my life begging for scraps of love from people who would never value me. I stood up from the table, carefully folded my napkin, and placed it next to my half-eaten plate. My mother asked where I was going, her voice sharp with warning. I told her I was leaving, just like my father had suggested. I said that I was done trying to earn their love, done sacrificing for people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient workhorse, done pretending that any of this was normal or acceptable. Peyton's face went pale, like she'd finally realized she'd pushed too far. My father told me to sit down and stop being dramatic, but I was already walking toward the door. My mother followed me, grabbing my arm, saying I was overreacting, that we could talk about this rationally. I pulled away from her and said there was nothing left to talk about. They'd made their priorities clear, and I was respecting their wishes by removing myself from the equation. I told them not to contact me, not to show up at my apartment, not to expect me at Peyton's wedding or any other family events. I said that they could have the family they clearly wanted, the one where Peyton was the center of everything and I was just a supporting character they could use and discard at will. I walked out of that house and got into my car, my hands shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove home in a daze, pulled into my apartment parking lot, and sat there in the darkness trying to process what had just happened. And slowly, underneath the hurt and the anger, I felt something else starting to grow. Relief, freedom, the exhilarating terror of having finally let go of a weight it'd been carrying my entire life. I'd spent 28 years trying to earn something that was never going to be given freely. And now, finally, I was done trying. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, a notebook beside me, and a clarity of purpose I'd never felt before. If I was going to leave, if I was going to truly burn this bridge, I was going to do it right. I wasn't going to just disappear and let them paint me as the unstable daughter who abandoned her family. I was going to make sure that everyone knew the truth, that the perfect image they projected to the world was exposed for the lie it was. I was going to take away the one thing my family valued above everything else, their reputation. The first call I made Monday morning was to the competitor company that had tried to recruit me 8 months earlier. I'd turned them down at the time because the position would have required relocating to Boston, and I hadn't wanted to leave Cleveland while I was still hoping things with my family might improve. But now, leaving sounded perfect. The recruiter was thrilled to hear from me, and within 3 days I had an offer. Director of Marketing Strategy, 60% salary increase from my current position, full relocation package, and a signing bonus that would replace the $20,000 ID lost to my parents. I accepted immediately and submitted my resignation with 2 weeks' notice. At work, I scheduled an exit interview with HR and Patricia. I kept it professional but honest, explaining that part of my reason for leaving was the hostile work environment created by having my sister in the same company, especially after the documented incident that had resulted in my warning. I didn't go into details, but I made sure it was on record that working with Peyton had been a significant factor in my departure. Patricia looked uncomfortable but understanding, and I could tell she was finally seeing the patterns she'd missed before. The next step was documentation. I spent an entire weekend compiling everything, every text message, every email, every photo, every financial record. I created a timeline that stretched back years, showing the pattern of favoritism, manipulation, and sabotage. I included bank statements showing the $20,000 loan that was never repaid and the $5,000 that went to Peyton's vacation. I included screenshots of the doctored messages Peyton had shown Lauren, alongside the originals that proved they'd been edited. I included testimony from Derek, who I'd reached out to in a moment of desperation and who'd been surprisingly willing to help once I explained what I was doing. Derek had felt guilty about the situation with Peyton, and when I asked him to write down what had actually happened, he agreed. He provided a detailed account of how Peyton had pursued him, How Shed manufactured emotional intimacy. How Head been too naive to see the manipulation until it was too late. He gave me copies of the messages Shed sent him, the ones where her intentions were clear even though Head been oblivious at the time. It wasn't about revenge against Derek, it was about establishing a pattern of Peyton's behavior that no one could dismiss as my imagination. I also got help from an unexpected source. Vincent, the HR manager who'd handled the complaint Peyton filed against me, sent me a private message through LinkedIn. He said he was reaching out off the record, that what he was doing could cost him his job, but that he felt I deserved to know the truth. After Id left, he told me, there had been an internal review of Peyton's performance. Without me there to cover for her mistakes, her actual work quality had become apparent. She was now on a performance improvement plan, barely hanging on to her job. Vincent had also pulled the security footage from the day my laptop was damaged, and while it didn't show Peyton deliberately spilling coffee, it did show her standing at my desk for several minutes before the spill, close enough to have done it on purpose. He couldn't give me the footage officially, but he described what He'd seen in enough detail that I could reference it. With all this evidence compiled, I created a Google document. It was comprehensive, meticulously organized, and devastating. I wrote it in a calm, factual tone, letting the evidence speak for itself. I didn't editorialize. I didn't rant. I just laid out the facts in chronological order. The document included photos from our childhood showing the stark difference in how we were treated, financial records proving the disparities in what our parents spent on each of us, workplace documentation showing Peyton's pattern of performance issues and my history of covering for her, and personal testimony from Derek about her romantic manipulation. Then I made a list of recipients. I didn't send it to my parents or Peyton directly, because I knew they'd just dismiss it or try to suppress it. Instead, I sent it to every member of our extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. I sent it to close family friends, the ones who'd watched us grow up and thought they knew our family dynamic. I sent it to people from my parents' church, their social circle, the community where they'd built their reputation. I included a brief cover note explaining that I was sharing this because I wanted people to understand why I was removing myself from the family, and that I hoped it might prevent other people from being manipulated the way I had been. I hit send on that mass email on a Thursday evening, 2 days before I was scheduled to leave for Boston. Then I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of wine, and waited for the fallout. It didn't take long. By Friday morning, my email was flooded with responses. My Aunt Martha, my father's older sister, was the first to call. She left a voicemail saying Shed had no idea, that she was horrified, that she wanted to talk to me before I left. Several cousins reached out with similar messages, expressing shock and support. A few people responded defensively, saying I was airing dirty laundry and that family matters should stay private. But the majority of responses were supportive, validating, and many included their own stories of noticing the favoritism over the years but not feeling like it was their place to say anything. My parents, I learned through the family grapevine, were in crisis mode. They'd started receiving calls and messages from relatives demanding explanations. People were canceling plans with them, declining invitations, expressing disappointment in how they'd treated me. My mother tried calling me repeatedly, but Id blocked her number. My father sent emails that bounced back because Id filtered him to spam. They were experiencing something they'd never faced before, social consequences for their actions. Peyton's situation was even more interesting. Several people forwarded me screenshots of her social media posts, where she was playing the victim, saying her sister had betrayed her privacy and was trying to ruin her wedding. But the comments on those posts weren't sympathetic. People were asking pointed questions, referencing specific incidents from the document, demanding accountability. Lauren, I heard, had reached out to Peyton and ended their friendship after reading the evidence that the screenshots had been manipulated. Other people who'd been friendly with Peyton were distancing themselves, not wanting to be associated with someone who'd been exposed as manipulative and dishonest. And then there was Garrett. According to my cousin, who loved gossip, had read the document and had some serious conversations with Peyton about her behavior. The fairy tale engagement was showing cracks. Garrett came from old money, the kind of family where reputation mattered, and he was suddenly seeing that he was about to marry into drama and dysfunction. The wedding planning had stalled, and there were whispers that he was reconsidering the whole thing. The most satisfying piece of information came from Vincent, who messaged me one last time before I left Cleveland. Peyton had failed her performance improvement plan at work. She'd been given clear objectives and deadlines, and without anyone to bail her out, she hadn't met a single one. She'd been terminated, effective immediately. She was unemployed, her engagement was falling apart, her social circle had evaporated, and her parents were facing social exile. Everything that had been handed to her, all the soft living she'd been promised, was crumbling because it had never been built on anything real. I packed up my apartment, with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I didn't take much, just clothes, books, and a few items that actually meant something to me. I left behind anything my parents had given me, any gifts from Peyton, any physical reminder of the family I was leaving. I hired movers for the furniture, changed my address with the post office, and arranged for my mail to be forwarded to my new apartment in Boston that I'd rented sight unseen. The night before I left, I allowed myself one moment of sentimentality. I drove past my parents' house, the place where I'd grown up, where I'd spent so many years trying to be good enough. The lights were on inside, and I could see silhouettes moving behind the curtains. I wondered if they were talking about me. If they were feeling any regret. If they finally understood what they'd lost. But it didn't matter anymore. Their regret, if it even existed, wasn't my responsibility. I'd spent 28 years making myself smaller to fit into their broken family dynamic. Now I was choosing myself, and it felt like finally being able to breathe after a lifetime of holding my breath. Boston welcomed me with cold rain and anonymous crowds, and I loved every minute of it. My new apartment was in a neighborhood I didn't know, filled with people who'd never heard of my family or their drama. I was starting over completely, and the freedom of that was intoxicating. My first day at the new job, I introduced myself as Cassandra, not as anyone's daughter or sister, just as myself. My new colleagues saw me as competent and professional because that's all I showed them. There was no family baggage weighing down their perception of me. No whispered history following me through the office. The work itself was challenging in the best way. I was managing a team of 8 people, developing strategies for major clients, making decisions that actually mattered. My boss, Rachel, was brilliant and demanding but fair, the kind of leader who pushed you to be better without tearing you down. Within the first month, I'd proven myself valuable enough that Rachel started including me in executive meetings. Within 2 months, I'd successfully pitched a campaign that won us a client worth $3 million. I was thriving in a way I never had in Cleveland, and I realized that I'd been held back not by lack of talent but by constant sabotage. My personal life started to rebuild too, slowly and carefully. I made friends with a woman named Simone who lived in my building, a graphic designer with a sharp sense of humor and zero tolerance for nonsense. When I eventually told her bits of my family story, she listened without judgment and then said, "Good for you for leaving. Life's too short to spend it with people who drain you." It was refreshing to have friendships that were simple and genuine, not complicated by years of shared trauma. 3 months into my new life, I met Julian at a bookstore on a Saturday afternoon. He was an engineer, calm and thoughtful, with a quiet confidence that I found incredibly attractive after years of dealing with manipulation and drama. We started dating casually, coffee dates that turned into long dinners, conversations that lasted until the bookstore staff politely told us they were closing. Julian knew about my family situation from early on because I refused to hide it or pretend it hadn't happened. His response was simple and perfect. "That sounds really hard. I'm glad you got out." Dating Julian was completely different from dating Derek. There were no games, no hidden agendas, no worrying about whether my family would interfere. Julian had a healthy relationship with his own family, weekly dinners with parents who actually liked each other, siblings who supported each other without keeping score. Being around them was strange at first, seeing what a functional family actually looked like, but it also showed me what I'd been missing and what I deserved. Back in Cleveland, the consequences of my exit continued to unfold. My Aunt Martha kept me updated despite my requests for minimal information. She was too excited about the family drama to keep it to herself. Peyton's engagement to Garrett had officially ended 2 months after I left. Had broken it off, citing fundamental differences in values and concerns about her character. Peyton had moved back in with my parents, unemployed and single, her social media presence reduced to almost nothing after the public exposure of her behavior. My parents had attempted to reach out several times through relatives, sending messages that I should come home, that we should talk, that family was forever. But their messages never included actual apologies, never acknowledged what they'd done wrong, just vague statements about how families should forgive each other and move past conflict. I didn't respond. Forgiveness might come someday, years down the line, when enough time had passed and I'd healed from the wounds they'd inflicted. But reconciliation required more than just my forgiveness. It required them to fundamentally change, and I had no evidence they were capable of that. The most interesting update came from Vincent one last time, breaking his own rule about staying in touch. The company had done a full review after Peyton's termination, looking into the circumstances around my departure and the complaint Shed filed against me. They'd discovered discrepancies in her account, found evidence that Shed been dishonest in her reports, and had removed the warning from my permanent file. It was a small vindication, but it mattered. If I ever wanted to return to Cleveland, my professional reputation was intact, but I had no intention of returning. Boston had become home in a way Cleveland never really had. I bought a small condo in a neighborhood I loved, decorating it exactly how I wanted without worrying about anyone else's opinion. I adopted a cat from a local shelter, a scraggly orange tabby who'd been overlooked for months because he wasn't cute enough. I named him Phoenix because we were both rising from ashes, and he spent his days sprawled across my couch like he owned the place. 6 months after leaving, I got a promotion to senior director. A year after leaving, Julian and I moved in together, combining our lives in a way that felt natural and right. 18 months after leaving, I stood in front of a mirror in a dress I'd chosen myself, preparing for a small wedding that would include Julian's family and the friends I'd made in Boston, but no one from my blood family. My Aunt Martha had asked if she could come, and I'd gently told her no, that this was about starting fresh, not bringing old wounds into new happiness. Sometimes people ask me if I regret leaving the way I did, if I wish I'd tried harder to make things work with my family. The answer is always no. I regret only one thing: not leaving sooner. I spent 28 years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it freely, trying to prove my worth to people who'd decided from the beginning that I was worth less than my sister. That was time I can never get back. Years of my life spent in service of a family that saw me as a resource rather than a person. Walking away from that dinner table, from that house, from that entire dynamic, was the bravest thing I've ever done. It wasn't easy. There were nights in those first few months when I cried, when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was the problem after all. But slowly, as I built a life based on my own choices and surrounded myself with people who valued me, I realized that I wasn't broken. I'd never been broken. I'd just been trapped in a system designed to benefit everyone except me. My sister did get to live soft, just like my parents promised her. But soft living doesn't build character, doesn't teach resilience, doesn't prepare you for a world that won't always cushion your falls. Peyton got everything handed to her, and when those hands were no longer there to catch her, she had no idea how to stand on her own. She'd been taught that manipulation was more valuable than merit, that appearance mattered more than substance, that she deserved things simply for existing. And now she was learning, the hard way, that the real world doesn't operate on those principles. As for me, I was made strong by necessity, forged in the fires of inequality and neglect. My parents thought they were complimenting me when they said I was fine on my own, that I didn't need their support. They didn't realize they were creating someone who would eventually realize she was better off without them. Every sacrifice I made, every time I picked myself up after they knocked me down, every skill I learned because no one was there to do it for me, all of it built a foundation they couldn't take away. They gave Peyton everything, but they gave me something more valuable by accident. They gave me independence. I learned that being strong doesn't mean you have to endure everything. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. I learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about respect, reciprocity, and genuine love. Without those things, it's just people who happen to share DNA. I learned that you can't earn love through sacrifice, that conditional love isn't really love at all, that your worth isn't determined by how much you're willing to suffer. The freedom I found on the other side of that door, the life I built from scratch in a city where no one knew my history, the relationships based on who I actually am rather than the role I was forced to play, all of it was worth the pain of letting go. I'm not bitter anymore. Anger requires energy, and I'd rather spend mine on building than burning. I'm not waiting for my parents to realize what they lost or for Peyton to understand what she destroyed. Their journey is their own, and I'm no longer responsible for guiding them through it. Sometimes, late at night when Julian is asleep beside me and Phoenix is purring on my chest and the city lights filter through our bedroom window, I think about that girl who spent her childhood doing dishes while her sister watched TV. I think about the teenager who worked double shifts to afford what her sister got for free. I think about the young woman who kept sacrificing, kept hoping, kept believing that eventually, it would be enough. And I wish I could go back and tell her that she was already enough, that she always had been, that the problem was never her. But I can't go back. All I can do is move forward, carrying the lessons but leaving the pain behind. So when people ask me if I regret leaving, I tell them I only regret one thing, not leaving sooner. Because the moment I walked out that door, I stopped being the daughter who was never enough and became the woman I was always meant to be. Strong, yes, but also soft in the ways that matter. Capable, yes, but also allowed to need help. Independent, yes, but also surrounded by people who choose to stand beside me not because they have to, but because they want to. That's the life I deserved all along. And now, finally, it's the life I have. I hope this story reaches someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's trapped in a similar dynamic and thinks they're crazy for feeling hurt. You're not crazy. You're not ungrateful. You're not selfish for wanting to be treated with basic respect. And you deserve better than what you're getting. Sometimes walking away is the only option, and that's okay. You're allowed to save yourself, even if it means leaving people behind. You're allowed to choose peace over family obligation. You're allowed to build a life where you're valued, not just used. So let me ask you, have you ever been the forgotten child in your family? Have you ever sacrificed everything only to watch someone else get credit? Drop your story in the comments below, because I promise you're not alone. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real stories about breaking free from toxic family dynamics. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, knowing you're not alone is the first step to finding your way out. Thank you for listening to my story, for validating my experience, for being the kind of audience that understands that family isn't always worth keeping. I wish you all the courage to choose yourself when the time comes, and the wisdom to know that leaving doesn't make you the villain. Sometimes it just makes you free. Take care of yourselves. And remember, you deserve to live soft too.